and today we're discussing Louise Perry. In June, Louise Perry gave the Diary of a CEO's Channel an interview, and this is how they describe her. Louise Perry, journalist, author, and podcast host. She is renowned for her views on topics such as sexual politics and the impact of modern feminist movements. So basically, she's renowned for her opinions. Not a bad gig, but that still doesn't make her a sexpert. And more to the point, she's renowned for her opinions because they seek to restrict women, which people really like for some reason.
Let's start with how this entire video frames Louise Perry. And I have to say, it seems to be a classic case of poisoning the well. Before any of Perry's actual points are addressed, the feminist cat lady already jumps in with dismissive language, saying Perry is just known for her opinions and isn't an expert. This is clearly an attempt to undermine her credibility preemptively, before any arguments are even heard. Now look, sometimes it's fair to highlight someone's lack of qualifications, especially if they're speaking on highly technical issues. But in this case, Perry is presenting publicly available information. Her claims don't require deep insider expertise. They're social observations and widely published facts that anyone with critical thinking skills can engage with. And speaking of credentials, if Cat Lady wants to throw shade, then let's see hers. At least Louise Perry holds a degree in anthropology. What does her critic bring to the table? She didn't say. I'm not saying she doesn't have credentials, nor am I saying people without degrees can't speak on issues. In fact, I reject the insufferable credentialism we so commonly see. But if you're going to play that game, you should be transparent about your own background. Let me be blunt. I am sick of the almost worship of academic credentials. I went to law school. I took courses in law, criminology, business, religion, international relations, and philosophy. And here's the truth. There was nothing I learned in those university classrooms that someone couldn't have learned on their own by simply buying the textbooks and studying. Seriously, even the lecture notes are available for purchase online. Universities do not have a monopoly on knowledge. Unless you're in a lab-based science or hands-on field, you don't need to pay tens of thousands of dollars to get informed. So don't fall for the myth that academic study makes someone more valid. It doesn't. And this whole line, she's just known for her opinions. What exactly is wrong with that? Since when is it shameful to be known for voicing thoughtful views on important topics? Isn't that how intellectual debate works? Now, let's address another recurring theme in feminist discourse, the idea that it's wrong to advocate for restricting women's sexual behavior. Feminists act like any call for limits, even reasonable ones, is oppressive. But somehow, people seem to forget men also being restricted. Let's not forget, the Catholic Church, as an example, prohibits lust and masturbation, restrictions that generally affect men more than women, given what we know about baseline differences in sex drive. And yes, I said generally. Because with feminists and leftists, you have to include every caveat. If you say something like, men have stronger sex drives, they'll cherry-pick a rare exception and pretend you made an absolute claim. They refuse to acknowledge general rules unless you explicitly spell them out. So let me be clear. On average, men have higher sex drives than women. This isn't controversial among scientists. It's supported by decades of research. And it matters, because it's part of the reason men, on the whole, struggle more with lust, with pornography, with masturbation, and yes, with sexual aggression when their desires are unchecked. Here's the evidence. Professor Lee Ellis, one of the leading scholars on sex differences and the motivations behind rape, lays it out clearly. It is hypothesized that the primary source of the evolved tension between the sexes is a stronger unlearned sex drive among men than among women, although a second behavioral sex difference will be postulated in Proposition 4. Evidence supporting the hypothesis that, on average, men have a stronger sex drive than women can be summarized as follows. A. In all societies yet studied, on average, men self-report preferring copulatory frequencies and other forms of sexual experiences in excess of what women prefer, both within and outside of marriage. B. Especially in the absence of sex partners, males masturbate considerably more often than do females. Not only is this true of humans in all populations thus far studied, but it has been documented in many other species of primates as well. C. Men are more likely than women to attempt to initiate sexual interactions. This is true not only among humans under a wide variety of circumstances, but it is also apparent among numerous other primate species. D. On average, Men describe coitus as more reinforcing and satisfying than do women. Women are more likely than men to report having sexual intercourse for reasons other than sexual gratification, e.g., for affection and out of a desire to be held and caressed. During sleep, men report greater frequencies of overtly sexual dreams, and they report having more orgasms during sleep than do women. Furthermore, men report thinking about sexual matters more frequently than do women, and references to copulation and other overt sexual behavior are more common in the graffiti of men than that of women. Considered individually, most of the above observations might be explicable in terms of cultural factors, and the fact that similar sex differences have been found in non-human species might be dismissed as a coincidence. However, considered collectively, the above evidence provides support for the argument that men have evolved a stronger sex drive than women. No one seems to have a problem restricting men's sexual freedom. That's widely accepted. In fact, women, and feminists in particular, are often very comfortable calling for restrictions on male behavior. We see campaigns everywhere pushing for clearer definitions of consent, stopping harassment, banning catcalling, not pressuring women, and so on. And look, some of these are important and necessary, but the common thread is that these are all about restricting men, and society accepts those restrictions without much resistance. Just walk around any university or public space. You'll see posters and campaigns focused almost entirely on men changing their behavior, because statistically, men commit the majority of sexual misconduct. That's fair to acknowledge. No problem there. So let's not pretend the issue is with the idea of restriction itself. Society already accepts that some restrictions on sexual behavior are necessary for the common good. The real question is, are the restrictions justified? Are they reasonable? Are they based on sound moral and empirical reasoning? But here's where the double standard kicks in. When someone suggests restricting women's sexual behavior, suddenly it's a scandal. Suddenly it's misogyny, repression, or a step backward. Why the hypocrisy? If we accept that uncontrolled male sexuality can be dangerous and should be guided or restrained, then why wouldn't we also accept that unrestrained female sexuality can have social consequences too? We don't live in a fantasy world where only one sex's actions have moral weight. Both men and women influence sexual culture, and pretending only men need discipline is not just dishonest, it's harmful. So again, the issue isn't whether we should have restrictions. It's whether those restrictions are wise, fair, and good. That's where the conversation should be. And avoiding it entirely by crying patriarchy every time a boundary is discussed helps no one. Now, I know I said a lot there, and to be fair, I don't know exactly which parts the cat lady would agree or disagree with. I want to be careful not to misrepresent her views or attribute arguments to her that she may not actually hold. My goal here isn't to strawman her. I'm simply using her comments as a springboard for a broader discussion. She may not endorse everything I've critiqued, and that's fine. The point is, her framing reflects a mindset and tone that many others do defend, and that's what I'm responding to. So even if she wouldn't personally argue every position I've mentioned, the discussion still matters. These are real cultural conversations that need to be had, and I'm here to have them, so please subscribe.
But I am very grateful for this interview because I've been working on a review of her book, The Case Against the Sexual Revolution, all year, and so far my review is 17 pages long, and I had 4 more chapters to go.
Credit where credit is due. Good on her for actually reading a book she disagrees with. That alone puts her ahead of most people today. Honestly, this is one of the biggest and most under-discussed problems in modern discourse. People refusing to read ideas they think they'll disagree with. It's not just that people aren't reading, although that's already a massive issue. It's that even when they do read, they only consume content that confirms their existing views. Of course, it's important to study the arguments and literature from your own perspective. But if you're not also reading opposing views, you're not challenging your perspective. You're just reinforcing what you already believe. And that's how echo chambers are built. As John Stuart Mill wrote in On Liberty, published in 1859, but when we turn to subjects infinitely more complicated, to morals, religion, politics, social relations, and the business of life, 3/4 of the arguments for every disputed opinion consist in dispelling the appearances which favor some opinion different from it. The greatest orator, save one, of antiquity, has left it on record that he always studied his adversary's case with as great, if not still greater intensity, than even his own. What Cicero practiced as the means of forensic success requires to be imitated by all who study any subject in order to arrive at the truth. He who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that. His reasons may be good, and no one may have been able to refute them. But if he is equally unable to refute the reasons on the opposite side, if he does not so much as know what they are, he has no ground for preferring either opinion. The rational position for him would be suspension of judgment, and unless he contents himself with that, he is either led by authority or adopts, like the generality of the world, the side to which he feels most inclination. Nor is it enough that he should hear the arguments of adversaries from his own teachers, presented as they state them, and accompanied by what they offer as refutations. That is not the way to do justice to the arguments, or bring them into real contact with his own mind. He must be able to hear them from persons who actually believe them, who defend them in earnest, and do their very utmost for them. He must know them in their most plausible and persuasive form. He must feel the whole force of the difficulty which the true view of the subject has to encounter and dispose of. Else he will never really possess himself of the portion of truth which meets and removes that difficulty. It is totally irrational to be afraid to read books you may disagree with. If you are religious, don't be afraid of reading an atheist book. If you are right and have the truth, there can be nothing there to refute it. Truth cannot be refuted, nor should atheists have an issue reading religious books. There's a lot to be gained reading that which you disagree with. I personally have benefited plenty by reading Christian books, though I am a Jew, not a Christian. Obviously, you don't need to accept everything you read.
This video should be easier, though I am disappointed the host, Steven, didn't see fit to include any sources in the description. But now that I'm thinking about it, does he ever fact-check his guests, or does he just take them on faith?
I am not sure he has an obligation to fact-check all his guests. The amount of time and expertise it would take means it is asking too much to fact-check all guests. Of course he should prepare for each topic and push back on some claims, but he is not obligated to fact-check all of them after the fact. Unless something egregious was said, most likely there is no moral obligation here.
Anyway, onward and into, per the thumbnail, what casual sex is really doing to women. We open with Louise sharing that she's in the having babies season of her life, and right away, I have thoughts.
Here she puts a content warning on the screen, also known as a trigger warning. I am not particularly against it, but I have seen claims it actually makes things worse, or does nothing at all. Here is what one study said on this. Trigger warnings, content warnings, or content notes are alerts about upcoming content that may contain themes related to past negative experiences. Advocates claim that warnings help people to emotionally prepare for or completely avoid distressing material. Critics argue that warnings both contribute to a culture of avoidance at odds with evidence-based treatment practices and instill fear about upcoming content. A body of psychological research has recently begun to empirically investigate these claims. We present the results of a meta-analysis of all empirical studies on the effects of these warnings. Overall, we found that warnings had no effect on effective responses to negative material or on educational outcomes. However, warnings reliably increased anticipatory effect. Findings on avoidance were mixed, suggesting either that warnings have no effect on engagement with material or that they increased engagement with negative material under specific circumstances. Not particularly impressive, but not terrible either. Perhaps they can be used in highly disturbing material, but not on mildly disturbing things. Overusing them will just be annoying and unnecessary.
It's a really interesting experience living the exact sort of social phenomena that I so often write and talk about, which is basically the role of women in participating in public life and the inherent ways in which the fact that women bear children comes into conflict with that, which is very much the subject of my first book, this question of like, if you can artificially suspend that, if the pill arrives in the 1960s and suddenly women can go from being constantly, I don't want to say at risk of pregnancy, because that's not the right word, like pregnancy is a good thing.
These folks will ring alarm bells all day about the risks of birth control, but then turn around and say pregnancy is a good thing.
Do you not believe that pregnancy is a good thing? Because that's what it sounds like. Pregnancy is what leads to new life, so yes, it is a good thing.
For one, pregnancy is riskier than birth control and abortion.
Yes, it is riskier, but that doesn't make it worse. Driving a car is riskier than walking, but driving is better for long distances. Same with pregnancy. It is more risky, but we need it for civilization to continue. And abortion seems like a pretty big risk to the fetus, who may have grown up to be a woman, but you don't seem to take that into account.
And for another, yes, at risk of pregnancy is a good term. Very few people want the chance of pregnancy every time they have sex.
Fair enough. And this is actually a somewhat powerful argument for abortion. If we ban abortion, then essentially every time a woman gets pregnant, she must give birth unless there's a serious life risk. This can lead to women who do not want possibly another child, especially if they had one only a year ago, to give birth again, sooner than they wanted to. A ban on abortion will lead to a massive number of such cases. I suspect this would also lead women to be more fearful of sex, even in marriage, when they know it could lead to another pregnancy, even with contraception. No contraception is 100% effective, but a pro-life absolutist would respond that none of this justifies ending innocent human life. No easy solutions on the abortion debate.
And pregnancy is a risk. You're gambling your health and life every time.
I actually agree with that. Pregnancy is a minor life risk, even with modern medicine. Understanding this was one of a handful of reasons I slightly softened my pro-life stance. I am still anti-abortion, but I do think some are necessary. I even had a realization that when we talk about justifying abortion where the mother's life is at risk, I didn't consider that every childbirth is a threat to the life of the mother. For every childbirth, there is a tiny chance of death. But does this tiny chance warrant the killing of the child that would have been born?
And since Louise is sharing her opinions, here's mine.
This comment seems odd to me. You don't need other people to be sharing opinions for you to share yours. If you have something worth saying, then you should say it.
It wasn't until the pill came along that people suddenly began to see pregnancy as a net positive. When you have ways to prevent it, ways to put it off until you're ready, ways to avoid it forever, then pregnancy becomes a wanted thing instead of something inevitable. I could probably rant about this some more, but I'll save it and let Louise continue.
Constantly having to negotiate the possibility of pregnancy, and then suddenly a new technology comes along, first time in the history of the world, which pretty much cuts that out. What does that do to women's public role, the social experience of being a woman? And my argument is it's had so much more of a profound effect than we tend to acknowledge. Because the fact that it's women who bear children is so socially important in terms of our ability to work, our economic vulnerabilities, our ability to participate in politics, all of this. And the pill is just this like enormous game changer where suddenly it's a choice. And I'm in a season of my life where I've chosen it.
And it is her right to choose that. I just wish we could stop opining over these incredibly personal decisions other people make for themselves.
Why? If your opinion can help others make better decisions, then you should share it.
Anyway, Stephen asks Louise what she thinks society disagrees with her on as it relates to these issues, and her response is that the dominant narrative is that this has been an unambiguously good thing and there's no trade-offs. And Louise is unable to answer if the net impact of the pill has been mostly positive or negative.
I think that one of the things that the pill and other reliable contraception, one of the ways in which it's magical and really good is that it allows people to plan their families. It allows women to have spaces between births, which are healthy. It's really, like, in a lot of cases, it's really bad for you to be constantly pregnant, right? It has a really, really deleterious effect on the body. So on that front, fantastic. And on a personal level, fantastic. The trade-offs are normally in other areas of life, like we have massively falling birth rates and there are political and economic problems arising from that. That's not just downstream of the pill, but the pill is a really big part of that story. Sexual culture has changed so much. And I think that causes a lot of misery, particularly for younger women who are younger than me.
So the good thing is that it allows women to plan and space their pregnancies, and the bad thing is that it can lead to a lower birth rate and, per Louise, change the sexual culture, which she thinks has made people, she later adds she doesn't think men have fared well either, miserable. To those wondering, yes, we are in for some classically Abba shenanigans about how you have to have premarital sex these days because if a man won't get it from you, he'll get it from that hussy over there. Anyway, Per Louise, the sexual revolution only benefited a small subsection of men, and I would say not being ostracized or punished because you've had sex outside of marriage is actually a net positive. This is all so painfully simple. If you don't believe in birth control, don't use it. If you don't want to participate in hookup culture, casual sex, sex before marriage, whatever, don't.
And if you don't believe in people owning assault rifles, don't buy one. And if you don't believe in people not vaccinating their kids, then just vaccinate your own kids. And if you don't believe people should smoke, then don't smoke. And if you don't believe people should gamble, then don't. And if you don't believe people should deny the Holocaust, then don't. And if you don't believe people should spank their kids, then don't. And if you don't believe people should misgender people, then don't. And if you don't believe people should participate in rape culture, don't do it. Sick of this attitude. The Quran teaches in Surah 3:104, "Let there be a group among you who call others to goodness, encourage what is good, and forbid what is evil. It is they who will be successful." You must speak out about negative behaviors. And yes, it's your opinion. Doesn't mean you should stay quiet about it. And Cat Lady doesn't even follow her own advice. She is constantly calling people out.
If that means someone you're interested in isn't interested in you, that's fine. You're incompatible. It might sting in the moment, but ultimately, that's a good thing to know. And honestly, it's not as though none of those things were happening before 1960. The consequences were just more dire, and I have a hard time understanding why anyone would want to go back to that. Anyway, birth control and casual sex bad. What's next? Of course, men can sleep around without getting married, because Christianity is fading away. Louise and Pearl apparently share the same opinion about men.
I was very familiar with sort of standard feminist theory. Standard feminist theory says men and women are basically the same. There aren't any real important differences between us, either physical or psychological, apart from, the baby's bit, whatever, who cares? And that sexual violence, rape, is not about sexual desire, it's about power. It's a power play thing. It's all sort of understood in political terms.
Again, feminism is not men and women are the same. It's that men and women are people and should be treated as such.
That is such a vague definition. Islam also believes men and women are people and should be treated as such. That doesn't mean Islam is a feminist religion, obviously.
I do find it interesting, well, maybe not, that Louise is happy to reference studies when it's something she agrees with, but when it's something that doesn't fit her worldview, what studies? Feminists did not make up what she just said. Studies show that men and women are more alike than they are different, and rape is about power, not some sort of uncontrollable lust.
Rape is about power, not uncontrollable lust. What an insufferably shallow and misleading claim. Let's unpack the layers of fallacy in this statement. First, it's a straw man. No serious scholar in the last several decades seriously argues that rape is simply the result of uncontrollable lust. That idea is mostly a relic of popular misconceptions, not modern criminology. So if you're refuting that claim, you're not engaging with actual scholarly views. Second, it's a false dichotomy. The claim that rape is either about power or uncontrollable lust suggests that it must be one or the other. But why? Different offenders commit rape for different reasons, and the empirical evidence shows that sexual desire is a central, though not exclusive, motivator in most cases. The feminist slogan, "Rape is about power," may have had rhetorical impact in highlighting systemic issues, but it has become a dogma detached from evidence, a rape myth of its own. It oversimplifies a complex and horrifying crime, and ironically erases the sexual nature of sexual violence. The reality is this: rapists use their free will to commit an evil act that harms another person. That harm may or may not be their goal, just as a robber may or may not intend to hurt anyone while stealing money. But no one says robbery is about power just because the criminal had power over their victim. In most cases, the goal is the loot. Just as in rape, the goal is often sex. This is supported by empirical criminology, such as in Cognition and Crime, Offender Decision-Making and Script Analyses, 2013, which states, in contrast, harm is incidental to predatory offenders. They deliberately harm victims, but do not have a particular desire to do so. Rather, they have some other goal in mind, and they are willing to harm the victim in order to achieve their goal. In other words, they expect the victim to be harmed, but they do not assign a positive value to that outcome. For example, robbery and rape typically involve predatory violence. Most robbers and rapists have no grievance with the victim and are indifferent to the victim's suffering. They might engage in violence for thrills or to force the victim to comply in order to get something else they want, e.g., money or sex. It's nothing personal. It's just business. Political philosopher Alan Wertheimer also demolished the myth that sexual motivation is irrelevant to rape. He explains that many feminists seem to believe their arguments are strengthened if they deny any sexual motivation. But this isn't a political issue. It's a matter of empirical investigation, and the evidence is clear. The infrequency with which rapists inflict physical injuries on their victims is, perhaps, the most important evidence against the hostility thesis. Data from the National Victim Center suggests that over 2/3 of rape victims report no physical injuries whatsoever, 24% report minor physical injuries, and only 4% sustain serious physical injuries. Rape typically involves little gratuitous violence above and beyond the violence necessary to achieve sexual intercourse or involved in intercourse itself. It is extremely rare for raped females to be killed. All this suggests that rapists are primarily motivated by a desire to gain sexual intercourse rather than to inflict suffering on their victims. In short, rape usually is a sexually motivated crime, not merely an expression of power or hatred. That doesn't mean the perpetrator couldn't control themselves. Of course they could have. They made a deliberate, immoral choice. Blaming lust as uncontrollable is a cop-out, and pretending that sex plays no role is equally absurd. So when someone repeats the claim that rape is about power, not sex, they're spreading a reductionist ideological slogan, not a scholarly conclusion. And when they attack a mythical view no scholar actually holds anymore, like rape is caused by uncontrollable lust, they're either ignorant of the debate or intentionally misleading. I'll be exploring the history of these myths, including the uncontrollable lust narrative, in a future video. But for now, it's important to call this what it is: nonsense pretending to be insight. There is a lot more that could be said, and maybe I will make a part 2, but this video is already taking forever and is extremely painful to listen to. This feminist lady is harming my mental health. Shame on her. Anyway, please like, subscribe, and comment. Take care of yourselves.